Well, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Welcome to the 2004 University College London summer course in English phonetics. You've passed the first test, you've found your way here, so congratulations. I'm Professor Wells, I'm the director of the course, and if there are any problems, they are ultimately my responsibility. So here I am. And you can see we have to get you all neatly arranged so that the photographer can fit you all in the picture. So please be there by 1 o'clock, 1300, in the front quad. Now, I thought you'd like to see the photograph from the first summer course in this series, 1947. Not easy to pick out people's pictures there, but they are all labelled. It's not big enough for you to see really, but in the middle there is Daniel Jones, Professor Daniel Jones, who founded the Department of Phonetics at University College London. And there as a young man is A.C. Gibson, who took over as the director of this summer course for many years, until I took it over 20 years ago from now. And other famous names like J.D. O'Connor at the end there. So that's a nice historical picture. So we now turn to the introduction to the content of the course. I want to talk about 4 particular topics this morning. One of them is phonetic transcription. Another one is about the general matter of learning pronunciation. One is about regular inflections in English. And the last is about technical terminology. And point 1 on our handout, phonetic transcription. I started with that because some people have the idea that phonetics is about phonetic transcription. Well, it isn't. Phonetics is about pronunciation, about making sounds. Phonetic transcription is a helpful tool to enable us to identify particular sounds, to refer to them in writing, to be clear what we're talking about. But phonetic symbols are a tool, a convenience, something useful. They're not the purpose of the exercise. There is a particular problem with learning English as a foreign language compared with learning some other languages, and that problem is the inadequate nature of English spelling. The fact that English spelling doesn't unambiguously indicate the pronunciation. This means that anybody studying English must have some other way of discovering what the pronunciation is of a word, as well as the orthography, because the orthography doesn't give you clear indication. It very often gives you a perfectly good indication, but it's not reliable. A lot of very common words in particular have arbitrary, strange. Good knowledge of English, in my experience, are not 100% certain how to pronounce particular words. There are some words in the vocabulary that they are wrong about. And if they have a wrong idea of what the sounds are that should be in it, well, then they're not going to sound right when they attempt to pronounce it. There's the kind of problem we have. You have in writing, what is it, agré, fret, pour industrie. How are you going to say that aloud in English? Well, it ought to be a great threat to the meat industry. And you notice the words great, threat, meat. Each of them spelt in the same way with the letters E, A, T. You might expect them all to be pronounced so that they rhyme, have the same sounds from the vowel onwards, but they don't. Great is great, rhymes with state. Threat is threat, rhymes with wet. Meat is meat, rhymes with your feet. And although the spelling is the same in great, fret, meet, the pronunciation is different. You just have to know this. There's no way of telling it from the spelling. And so one of our long-term problems that we face with you is for you to learn what is the appropriate pronunciation for each word whose spelling you know. Now, English learners of French or German or Russian face the problem that we have to learn the gender of each noun that we learn. And this is a difficulty for us. We have to remember, is hand, is it masculine, is it feminine? We sort of feel in Spanish, mano, it looks as if it ought to be el mano. But no, we have to learn it's la mano. That's an arbitrary thing, we have to learn about it when we learn Spanish. The arbitrary thing you have to learn in English is how to pronounce the word. We don't have genders, but we do have these difficulties of pronunciation. So this is the problem of the relationship between letters and sounds. Letters are marks that you can see, things that you can write. They might be on paper, they might be on a screen like this. But you can't hear letters, you can only see them. Sounds are things which you can hear, noises that we make with our vocal organs, or perhaps using a loudspeaker or something. Sounds can be heard, letters can be seen. Please try not to confuse the two of them. Speech and writing, two different things. We're studying the relationship between them. I get very cross sometimes with the English language. People use new expressions like text speak. Now this is when you have a mobile phone, a cell phone, a handy, depending on which country you're in, and you write in a special way, leaving out some of the vowels and writing L and the figure 8 to mean late and that kind of thing. This is a way of writing English, but people call it text speak, and it's nothing to do with speaking. So that's the kind of confusion that exists among the general public. You are not the general public. You are the experts in phonetics. You need to have a very clear difference in your mind between speech and writing, between letters and sounds. Let's look at some of the difficult things in English. We've got the word front and back. You all know that word. But the spelling is such that you might expect it to be front, like font. It is not front. No native speaker of English says front. Every kind of English says front or the equivalent vowel in the local accent. In the north of England, okay, people say front because they say bus to ride on rather than bus, but it's the corresponding sound. Everybody who's a native speaker of English makes a difference in sound between the vowel of front and the vowel of font. Broad. The spelling looks just like the spelling of road. So you might think that broad and road rhyme, but they don't. Broad road. It is a broad road. Well, perhaps we can work out what you mean, but it's wrong. That word is not broad, or the other way around, road is not road. They don't rhyme with one another, they have different sounds. And I apologize, in a sense, for the English language, because the spelling does suggest that they should rhyme. But broad is one of the very few exceptions with OA spelling, where the sound is or rather than diphthong O. And likewise, if you're used to American English, then it's broad and road is road. And in American English, it's a broad road. In British English, it's a broad road. But the two words do not rhyme in any kind of native English. Then we've got all these pairs of related words. Students study. Same spelling, S-T-U-D, different pronunciation. You probably know that, but you might get caught out with some less familiar words. Here's sort of intermediate level of difficulty. Analysis. but to analyze. We can argue about the spelling of that, because Americans might spell it with the letter Z or Z, but anyhow, we all agree on the placement of the stress, the word stress, which goes on the now in analysis, but on the an in analyze. And similarly for many, many pairs, preside, president, in that one. So that's another difficulty in English, because that's not shown in the spelling. In Spanish, yes, you put acute accents to indicate where the stress is in an unexpected position. Japanese is another problem again. Japanese are used to this arbitrary relationship between writing and speech, because you have to learn absolutely arbitrary relationships between kanji and pronunciation. So English is harder than Spanish, easier than Japanese, in my opinion, in this relationship between spelling and sound. Okay, so we've got listening and we've got speaking. These are two sides of using a language. You're listening to me, I'm speaking. If we have a conversation together, then we have to switch roles. You have to start speaking, and I have to start listening. This means that both of these activities need to be practiced. Sometimes people learning a foreign language concentrate too much on speaking and not enough on listening. And that's when I get complaints from people that they have been studying English for 10 years, they come to London, they can't understand a word that people say to them. That's because they haven't enough experience in listening. So you do have to practice this. Lectures like this are perhaps the easiest kind of listening, because I'm speaking, I hope, slowly and clearly. I hope my thoughts are well structured, well organized, and presented to you in a logical way. Everyday conversation is not like that. Everyday conversation is fast, not so clear, not so well thought out, sudden changes of direction, sudden new ideas, and therefore it is much more difficult to follow. But we'll do our best to give you practice in listening as well as practice in speaking. In particular, we're anxious that you should be able to recognize sounds, recognition, as well as producing them, production. Hearing the difference between confusingly similar sounds. And that's why, for all the groups, we have ear training in the program. For groups 3 to 13, this will be at a specified time of day. For groups 1 and 2, it will be incorporated in your other classes. But this means we shall give you systematic dictations where we dictate to you in a controlled manner, and you have to write down in phonetic symbols what we dictate. This means we're not concerned so much about the meaning, we're concerned that you should hear the sounds. And we will drill you, as necessary, to hear the contrast between sounds. Ear training, then, practicing hearing, and of course we shall have pronunciation drills, practicing sounds, practicing you making the sounds. And those are the two sides to the coin which everybody may need to practice. Okay, just consult your handout a minute. The last point under 1 on your handout, you'll see, is consult a dictionary. That's what to do if you don't know how to pronounce a word. Well, of course, if you've got a native speaker, you can always ask. But if you're by yourself, then your dictionary will tell you. I hope using phonetic symbols, but virtually every dictionary of English as a foreign language gives you some kind of information about the pronunciation of a word. When you learn a new word, learn its pronunciation with it. And we shall also give you practice in transcribing. This is when you take a text in ordinary spelling and you convert it into phonetic symbols to make sure that you know how to pronounce each word in it. More than that, not only how to pronounce each word in it, but how to make the adjustments necessary for connected speech. Because in connected speech, not every word is pronounced in the same way that it would be if you say it in isolation. So we shall be giving attention to these processes that happen in running speech. Point 2 on our handout, contrastive analysis. Those of you who are language teachers may know about the theory of contrastive analysis, which proceeds by comparing and contrasting the sounds, or in general linguistic structures, in two different languages. The source language that the learners start with, their mother tongue, their first language, their L1, and the language they're trying to learn, the target language, the L2, in this case, English. And by comparing the sound systems of the two languages, you can predict many of the pronunciation problems that will arise. Not all of them. There are certain problems that can't be accounted for in this way, but a good number of them can. So, for example, if the learner's first language is Spanish or Japanese, we know that those languages make no difference between the sounds which in English are B and V, as in ban and van, or boat and vote. We can therefore predict that Spanish-speaking or Japanese-speaking learners will have a problem hearing and producing the difference between a boat and a vote, or a ban and a van. Whereas speakers of French, or of Lithuanian, or of German, or of Polish will have no such problem, because that contrast exists in their language. Now, everybody therefore has certain easy things in English and certain difficult things. And they're different depending on what your first language is. This is why it's so very difficult to write a general phonetics of English textbook that will work everywhere in the world. Because what is easy for the French is difficult for the Japanese. What's easy for the Japanese may be difficult for the French. It has to be tailored. Contrastive analysis tells us what are the things we particularly need to concentrate on. Where the two languages are the same, German has a B and a V, then we speak of positive transfer. You just go on doing the same thing in English that you're used to doing in your own language. But where they're different, then we have negative transfer. There are going to be difficulties, problems, because you will get interference from the first language. You will tend to make the sound wrong. You will tend to do a B instead of a V, a V instead of a B. You will tend to have difficulty in hearing them apart. Let's see an example with vowels. In English, we've got 3 vowel sounds. E, a, a. We see them in this set of words, a bed. That's where you sleep. A bed. Bad. Not good. Bad. Bud. In spring, the trees, the flowers put out buds. A bed. A bad. A bud. They're all 3 different from one another. But in this general area of vowels, some languages don't have 3 different vowel sounds, but only 2. English has 3 vowels, but many languages have only 2. And then those languages have to, as it were, map one of their vowels onto 2 different English vowels. And there are 2 possibilities. On the left there, we have what happens in Spanish or in Japanese, where the native language has an e and an a. And so, bed is one, and bad has to do for both of the others, or baddo in the case of Japanese. The other possibility, illustrated by German or Polish or Russian, here is a bed, that's not bed, and the other is a bud. And we have a difference between bed and bud. That's not good either, because English has three different possibilities. So somehow we have to force three vowels out of those two. And that means that the Germans and the Russians and the Hungarians have to drill the difference between bed and bad and bad and bed, bed, bad, bad, bed. But the Japanese and the Spanish have to drill the difference between bad and bad and bad and bad, 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 bad. Your language, if I haven't mentioned it, probably slots into one of those two possibilities, or you have all three and you're lucky. Okay, this then leads to confusion, negative transfer. Now, this is one of the areas where English spelling actually is quite helpful, because the spelling does tell you, the Spanish and the Japanese, whether you should be using a or a. If the spelling is the letter A, then the sound might be a. It could be various other things, of course, but it's never, never, never a. So from the spelling of the words hat, cap, ran, stack, have, gather, tram, dabble, you know that it's not hut, cup, run, and so on, because the spelling tells you. On the other hand, if the spelling is the letter U, or the spelling is the letter O, then the sound might be a, or of course all sorts of other things, but it will never, never, never be a. So at the bottom there, from the spelling, you know that hut, cup, run, stuck, love, mother, come, trouble, have a, and they could never, never be hat, cap, ran, and so on. Which is why I am amazed when I conduct classes for postgraduates, master's students, people at Jacet seminars or whatever, and I ask them to do transcriptions, I still get this error, where people think that it should be a and it ought to be a, or they think it's a and it ought to be a, because the spelling really does tell you if you know the rule. So please learn the rule. In many other cases, of course, there is no rule, then you have to learn it arbitrarily. But where there is a rule, please use them. Another kind of problem that we haven't discussed concerns not sounds so much as sound combinations. Phonotactic errors, as we call them. The phonotactics of a language means the rules say what combinations of sounds you can have. English is difficult, complex, looked at from the point of view of the languages of the world, inasmuch as it has complex clusters of consonants, groups of consonants all together. And this means that people whose first language has greater restrictions on the possibilities of clustering are going to have difficulties with sounds at particular places in words or syllables. So if we take, for example, the word strong, strong, strong. In English, that's one syllable. Strong. But depending on our first language, it may sound as if it's two syllables, strong, and dum. Or it may sound even like sit-along, four, sit-along. Yes. Well, you have to get used to listening in English. And in English, strong is one syllable. Very difficult. So it needs practice. Because if your language doesn't admit clusters, if you are a speaker of Spanish, Esperanto, or Arabic, citron, or Japanese citron, then you have to learn about those differences and learn to hear as well as to pronounce strong. Right, next point. 3 on our handout, phonetic rules for regular inflections. What I want to show you is how marvellous phonetics is, how it tells you things that you otherwise would find it difficult to explain. The English plural, we all know how to do it in spelling. We write a letter S, or sometimes ES, but what about pronunciation? Pronunciation, there are 3 possibilities. Here are 3 animals for us. Cat gives us cats. Dog gives us dogs. Horse gives us horses. So we've got s, z, is. 3 regular ways of forming the English plural. How do we know which it is? Well, we have to learn to classify speech sounds, to classify consonants. One of the first things we shall be learning in a day or two is the difference between voiceless and voiced. In cat is voiceless. Voiceless s is what we add. Z is the same sound but voiced. Dog g, g, g ends in a voiced g. So we add a voiced z, keeping the voicing the same. Dog. So the rule is simple. We look at the last sound and we say, is it voiceless or voiced? If it's voiceless, we add s. If it's voiced, we add z. Easy rule. Almost every day I hear somebody who is Swedish or Norwegian or Danish, excellent English, but they say things like dogs because they don't know this rule. You're the experts. You now know this rule. You can apply it. What about horses? Well, we have a class of sounds called sibilants. There are their phonetic symbols. These are the sounds s, z, sh, sh, and sh. And they have certain phonetic properties in common, which we should look at. But after sibilants, we have to add a vowel before the z. So we get horses as an extra syllable. Buses, horses, buzzes, rushes, garages, churches, judges. That rule is easily stated in phonetic terms, but can seem mysterious until you've done some phonetic analysis. Now, we haven't got time to discuss the past tense ending, which is on your handout, and which does exactly the same, nor have we got time to go through the technical terminology at the bottom of your handout, nor have we got time to go through all the phonetic symbols on the back of your handout. That is by design. I didn't expect to have time to go through those. They're here as a reference for you because you will need it in your classes afterwards. Can I draw your attention to the importance of these 3 terms when we're classifying consonants in this technical terminology? We have to talk about V and P and M. That is the voicing of a sound, voiceless or voiced. Let's study that. About the place of articulation and the manner of articulation. I'll be giving you lectures on all 3 of these subjects in detail. But you might just like to know them at the moment, because when we refer to sounds, we typically make reference to their being voiceless or voiced, to their place of articulation, and to their manner of articulation. So if I say voiced, bilabial, nasal, you know I mean an M sound, which is voiced, voicing, which is bilabial, 2 lips, place of articulation, and which is a nasal, air coming out through the nose, manner of articulation. And by saying voiced, bilabial, nasal, we have identified